In the previous episode, I listed down my personal top 20 PlayStation 2 games. So in today's episode, attention will be focused on the PlayStation 3. Now during the mid-2000s, the PlayStation 3 did have a rocky start, what with its really high price point with their first models. But give credit where it's due though, at least the price point of those first models are not in the same level as that of the ill-fated Panasonic 3DO. What I have here is a second model PlayStation 3. And beginning with this model, not only would PS3s become more affordable, but it would also help bring itself back from falling behind. And it was also during the late 2000s and early 2010s that the PlayStation 3 would make a miraculous comeback with more marquee titles for the console that, while it is impossible during that point to catch up with the Wii's dominance, the PlayStation 3 would maintain a strong second place at the end of the 7th generation, and it would also outlast, or rather outlive, the other two consoles during that generation. Even now, I would find myself going back to this console either for nostalgia or catch up with games that I have yet to defeat. And in today's video, I'll be counting down my personal top 20 PlayStation 3 games. Why top 20? Why keep things on top 10 when you can double down? The road to the PlayStation 5 continues, right here on Top of the Game Chain. My rules for today's countdown will be slightly altered, and some will be retained from the last video. So we'll start off with number 1, only one game per franchise with some exceptions. 2, certain games from the same series that play in different genres or subgenres will be considered. 3, as the PlayStation 3 is region-free, imports will also be considered. 4, remastered games from the PlayStation 2 and other consoles from that generation will not count. 5. Games that are online only will not count at all, as it's likely servers from those games will be shut down by this point. And 6. Even though many of the games on the PlayStation 3 are also multi-platform, if I played them first on the PlayStation 3, then those games will be counted. With that said, let's begin the countdown. Let's start the list off with an underrated action RPG called 3D Dot Game Heroes. The setting is in the kingdom of Dotnia that was once in danger until a past hero sealed the Dark Overlord from the land, but its citizens grew tired of the world being in 2D, so the king decrees that the world will be converted to 3D. You then take the role of a warrior that you created, who is said to be the past hero's descendant, and take up arms to fight the Dark Overlord who was suddenly revived and save the kingdom. Right away, the game is definitely inspired by a familiar game on the NES, but also other games like the earlier Dragon Quest titles. The game also parodies one other RPG that is very infamous for its not-so-good gameplay, but I'll leave that to you to figure that one out. Just like the RPGs on the NES, you control your character armed with an ancient sword that you pick up, and when at full HP, the length of your sword grows to ludicrous sizes whenever you swing the sword. Other common action RPG tropes include going into dungeons, slaying enemies for health and currency, solving puzzles to gain key items that you'll need in your quest, and you can also use collected currency to gain more items or power up your weaponry. The game has a great soundtrack that conveys the heroic quest that you're undertaking, the game's story is very comedic with all the NES references, and the overall gameplay is solid, as it did draw inspirations from old school NES games. Definitely worth checking out, as it's only available on PlayStation 3. Speaking of games inspired by old school NES games, here's one from the well-known run-and-gun shooter, the Contra series. At number 19, it's Contra Uprising. The game starts off with 2 characters, with 3 more that can only be purchased as DLC, each with their own attributes. As with any other Contra game, you'll be shooting everything in sight while also picking up special weapons for better firepower. Just like Contra 3 on SNES, you can also carry up to 2 weapons, and whenever you collect the same weapon several times, you can improve its power. The game has 2 modes. Arcade mode, which is self-explanatory, while Rising mode is also arcade mode, but with the option to stage select whenever you complete a mission, and you also collect points in that mode, which you can use to upgrade your characters either by giving them more HP, more techniques that you can perform, or upgrade weapons. The graphics and animation of the game are very beautiful as they are done by Arc System Works, especially one of its key people, Guilty Gear creator Daisuke Shiwatari. Also, the soundtrack is done by Arc System as well, so you can expect huge amounts of heavy metal in each stage. The game is digital only, so if you still have a PlayStation 3 or Xbox 360 in your household, both the game and its DLC are worth the investment, and since this is a Contra game, the game will definitely be hard. It's possible to go through the whole game yourself, but it's more fun with a friend, in case things go really hard. Speaking of hard games, we have a game from a franchise that's well known for being too difficult since the 80s. Ninja Gaiden Sigma 2, an updated version of Ninja Gaiden 2 for the Xbox 360. Even so much as the very first stage, you'll be bombarded with enemy ninjas out for your blood, and the enemy AI is very relentless. You'll spend so much of your time either jumping out of harm's way or blocking and dodging their attacks while quickly fighting back. Aside from your sword, you also have other weapons that you can acquire throughout the whole game. You have projectile weapons to stall your enemies for time, and you can also perform some close-range ninja techniques for some devastating kills. The game is greatly enhanced to have more stages, more battles that are not present in the 360 version, and it also has extra characters that would expand the story, and they have their own special moves that they can perform as well. In addition to your standard story mode, you'll also have Team Mission mode, where you and either an AI, local, or online partner would take on various missions and defeat all enemies, and you can perform double ninpo magic to destroy all enemies in the field. While not as gory as the original 2 was, the game still maintains some levels of fatalities from past games. It still has the fast-paced action, very responsive controls, wonderful graphics, and the high-level difficulty that the series is known for. With such variety, the game is definitely worth it, even if it is hard. The game is also available on the PlayStation Vita if you choose to play it that way. From the makers of Disgaea comes this underrated 2D hack-and-slash, Battle Princess of Arcadius. If you ever played the game Odin Sphere on PlayStation 2, then this game should make you feel right at home. The protagonist is a ditzy princess named Plume, who is defending her kingdom from demons that are suddenly coming out of nowhere, and she's investigating as to the cause of their sudden appearance, while also taking on other enemy soldiers threatening her kingdom. The gameplay has you going through different areas, attacking enemies to gain experience points, gain some cash and other items in order to gain some new weapons, gain new abilities, and buy some healing items for the coming battles ahead. As you progress with the story, you'll eventually gain more party members in the team with different fighting styles, and you can have up to 3 members in a team before entering an area. However, stages are not limited to just regular skirmishes, as there will also be battles such as siege missions, where you have to be sure that your armada is powered up enough to take on huge demons, or in some battles, take out the leader of an army. The game has such colorful visuals, nice animation, the story has some good humor, and the game has such great music that it's actually one of my favorite game soundtracks. The game is available as a digital download, as its physical version is Japan only, so getting the game on the PlayStation Network is definitely worth it in my opinion. Here's another game from the same company in conjunction with Idea Factory, an underrated RPG called Trinity Universe. While I'm familiar with Nippon Ichi Software, it was from this prior game called Cross-Edge that I was introduced to both Idea Factory and Compile Heart, known for their niche RPG library that also combines visual novel elements. Cross-Edge has some characters crossover with other characters from other games like Etna and Prinny from Disgaea, and some characters from Darkstalkers, just to name a few, and in the game Trinity Universe, characters from Disgaea and characters from the Atelier RPG series would show up here as well. The plot of Trinity Universe revolves around a mystery involving objects that shape like common everyday items or foods drifting around space at random that suddenly disturbs the universe for some strange reason, and it's up to 2 protagonists, Kanata and Rosalia, to get to the bottom of the mystery, which will lead to their eventual meeting. Unlike Cross-Edge, the battle system has attacks that uses certain amounts of attack points, and some skills that you can perform in battle are assigned to 3 different attacks: light, heavy, and magic. More damage can be dealt with depending on the combination of button presses, as well as knowing the right character combinations for a team-up attack. Time is a factor in this game, as certain dungeons will only stay active in a set period of time, and you have to destroy a dungeon's gravitational field and leave the dungeon at once before you get drifted away along with it. Some dungeons and drifting objects can be restrained if you make use of the anchors you obtain throughout the game. While the overall design of the dungeons are decent at best, the models and artwork of the characters are nicely designed, the battle system is easy to manage as long as you're quick about it, the story has some good humor, especially from the disguised characters, and the overall gameplay is easy to learn. It's definitely worth having it on your PlayStation 3 library. I was just talking about outer space in the last entry, and here's a game from a well-established franchise that involves space travel with ounces of pure mayhem. Ratchet and Clank Into the Nexus. Truthfully, I had a hard time deciding between A Crack in Time and Into the Nexus, as both games are the best in the PS3 Ratchet and Clank lineup, but ultimately I selected Nexus. Just like any other Ratchet and Clank game, you go from different planets, completing your main objectives, and some side quests for some extra currency, and of course, it's all about the weapons you buy or obtain throughout the game. An element exclusive to the game's story is gravity, as you're manipulating its power in order to get through hard-to-reach areas that your own gadgets can't do otherwise. And Clank has sections where you're controlling gravity to navigate him in these mazes to achieve your objective. The weapon experience system remains active in the game, and by spending materials called Raritanium, you can also improve a weapon's performance, and you're going to want to do that because even though the game has only a few planets to visit, these planets have bigger areas to explore to prevent the game from coming too short. It may not be as big as past PS3 Ratchet games were, but the game still provides a great amount of action, the controls remain smooth and a little more refined, the visuals are how you would expect them in the series, and of course, all the fun weapons that you can use. If you can track down all the PS3 Ratchet games, get ready to cause destruction to your enemies at your heart's content. You ever watch the show Mucha Lucha? Such a great show in the WB, but it's sad that it only lasts for 3 seasons, as it has a great cast of characters, great comedy, and over-the-top action that was way beyond actual luchador promotions in real life like CMLL or AAA. But what happens if you take the elements of Lucha Libre and combine that with elements of the non-linear Castlevania games? You get Guacamelee. And shout out to Some Call Me Johnny, as it was from his review of the game that got me into playing it as well, and the game looks so great. If you played Castlevania Symphony of the Night, then this game will definitely be a great time for you. You're in control of Juan Aguacate, a farmer turned luchador with a mystical mask, out to save his love interest as well as his nation from an undead overlord named Carlos Calaca. Given the theme of the game, you'll mostly be using close quarters combat against your enemies, and when prompted, you can grab your enemies and either toss them to other foes, or perform techniques that are synonymous with professional wrestling like a pile driver or suplex. Enemies drop currency upon death, and you can use them on save points and spend your money by increasing your HP, increase your stamina to perform special attacks, or learn some new techniques, which you'll need them for other enemies that can't be defeated by other means. You can also use the save points to change different costumes that have certain advantages, whether you can perform more powerful grab moves, or if you prefer strong style, you can have one change into Juanita to have better striking power at the cost of throwing strength. Since the game is non-linear, you'll more than likely explore every inch of each area to obtain some items and new moves, which is a plus for me. The game really loves to make references of other franchises, and I love how the game drew many inspirations from the culture of Mexico. If you haven't got a chance to play the game yet and somehow don't have a PlayStation 3 anymore, fear not, because the enhanced version of Guacamelee is also available on PS4, Xbox One, Switch, and Steam. This game is muy excelente and worth the investment. In the last countdown, I added the Fist of the North Star fighting game at number 13, and in today's countdown, also at number 13, here's another game from the series, Fist of the North Star, Ken's Rage. Unlike the last game, the game is instead a brawler, using Koei Tecmo's Dynasty Warriors engine. The game has 2 modes. Legend mode, where you control certain available characters and each of their tale follows their chosen path, chronicling the events that happened in Season 1 of the show, while Dream mode explains each character's story and given a hypothetical scenario of what would happen if their fates have changed. If you played any Dynasty Warriors game, this game is easily manageable, and I enjoyed it overall, especially that it makes up for the fact on how upset I was with Dynasty Warriors 6. The roster is categorized into 3 types: Hokuto Shinken, Nanto Seiken, and unique style. As with any other Warriors title, you have your standard light and heavy attacks that you can perform combos with, and you also have your Muso attack, or your signature move button, and the amount of aura is depleted depending on the selected signature move. Whenever you defeat enemies and clear missions, you can use the acquired points that you collected at the end of a mission and spend them on a skill point diagram of each character to power them up, increase some benefits and endurance, or learn some new signature moves. As you would expect on the show, there will be heavy violence and enemies can be defeated in such extreme ways, such as enemies being blown apart by Hoto Shinken moves, or be sliced to pieces with Nanto Seiken techniques. The studio has done a great job of creating a dreadful atmosphere and visual representation of the Earth in ruins to make it as close to the show as possible. The controls of the game work well, the Dream Mode is an interesting mode to play, and since it's done by Koei Tecmo, great soundtrack all around. The game is not only great for fans of Dynasty Warriors, but also for fans of Hokuto no Ken as well. In the last countdown, I decided to leave out Guilty Gear X2 Accent Core, but in today's video, I'll make sure one game from the series gets the spotlight. Guilty Gear Excerpt Sign. I don't think I need to explain the game that much because if you played Guilty Gear X2 prior, Guilty Gear Excerpt would still retain the fast-paced action and very responsive gameplay, with combos that you can pull off and follow up with, and instant kill moves that are still present and accounted for. Counting the DLC characters, the game has 17 characters, with 5 of them being newcomers to the game, but if you played past games, each character would be fighting with techniques that are either devastating or just downright wacky but still effective. Starting with Guilty Gear Xrd, the series would have a different story mode, which unlike past games, the scenes are more animated than having still shots with text, and it also provides an option to pause the story and view the glossary to help keep up with what's going on within Xrd and what went down prior. As expected with Guilty Gear, the graphics are very colorful and does a great job of blending 2D and 3D designs together. The character sprites are much bigger this time around, their animations flow nicely, and the use of 3D cutaways when certain moves are performed is visually stunning that this design choice would be used again in another fighting game that I'll mention soon in the future. With such a beautiful presentation and outstanding soundtrack, as it always does with every Guilty Gear game, if you're just getting into the series, Guilty Gear Xrd Sign would be a great game to start. Time to don the mask and cape and bring justice by taking out criminals as the Dark Knight himself in Batman Arkham Asylum. The whole game focuses on Batman in his mission to stop the Joker after he had purposefully let himself be caught in order to trap Batman, Commissioner Gordon, and many of Arkham's personnel with the help of Joker's mole from the inside, while Batman also has to deal with notable criminals and maintain security within the building. You can move Batman freely around the asylum, looking for clues or gain some useful information on how to advance with the story. You can use the game's detective vision to solve some puzzles or reveal some hidden secrets by using some gadgets that you'll eventually obtain throughout the story. The combat is where it's at. You'll always find yourself facing a group of enemies than just one, and you have to chain some combos while also quickly countering your enemies until they're all knocked out. You'll get experience points at the end of a battle, and the higher the combo string, you'll earn even more points that you can use to upgrade either Batman's gadgets or his performance. Experience points doesn't just come from fisticuffs, as you can also gain them from sections involving stealth, such as getting a good vantage point on the statues and perform an inverted takedown. The atmosphere of the game is exactly what you'd expect in Batman's world, as it is very dark. The structural design of the asylum is excellent, as well as the nice character models, and the game has great voice acting, especially with Kevin Conroy, Mark Hamill, and Arlene Sorkin reprising their roles as Batman, Joker, and Harley Quinn respectively. Usually people would immediately assume that games based on comic books are just shameless cash grabs than good games, but Batman Arkham Asylum is the complete opposite, as Rocksteady Games took so much time to create a game that gives you the feel of being Batman. So this game is well worth spending if you haven't done so yet. Speaking of comic books, here we have a game starring the Merc with the Mouth himself, Deadpool, and this game is just straight up wacky just like the character. As expected with Deadpool, the game would have many comedic and senseless moments as well as the constant barrage of breaking the fourth wall and numerous amounts of meta humor. You'll definitely get so much laughter from all the antics Deadpool would do, such as slapping an unconscious Wolverine while also spouting out humorous quips. Just like the Batman Arkham games, you'll gain experience points by killing off enemies with your assortment of weapons and techniques. If you can keep your combo count high and long enough, that means more experience points for you. Or in this game's case, they're called Deadpool points. The difference is that Batman doesn't kill, but Deadpool, it's fatality central for him, as you can slice off their limbs or blast their heads clean off. Enemies will also drop ammo because you can run out of ammo at any time if you're not attentive of how much you have left. The Deadpool points can also come in the form of coins that you find around the field, and you can use those points to upgrade his performance or be armed with more weapons to use, and you can upgrade their strengths as well. Even at certain checkpoints, Deadpool will often suggest you, the player, to bring up the upgrade screen and start spending. Just like how Rocksteady Games did with Batman, the development team behind Deadpool really had a fun time of making this game, with all the quips that make Deadpool who he is, all the humor, and the abundance of over-the-top gimmicks. This is another comic book-based game worth having in your library. From the team behind Sly Cooper is another great series called Infamous, and Infamous 2 takes the number 9 spot. The game picks up where the first game left off, and protagonist Cole McGrath needs to find new ways to power himself up in order to take on a giant entity known as the Beast. As with the first game, you're in an open world setting, letting you explore the city at your leisure and doing some side quests early before taking on the main story, and the narrative depends on your actions. The game's karma system will start off neutral, and depending on the type of mission you're taking, will determine your alignment, which will also have some influences on how Cole will be treated. By defeating enemies, you'll gain experience points that you can use to upgrade Cole's abilities. However, some abilities can only be accessible depending on his alignment in the karma system. Experience points can also be gained by either helping out citizens or completing missions. Your powers are limited, and some puzzles in the game will require some huge amounts of energy, which you can recharge yourself by absorbing electricity from powered sources like generators. The action of the game is very intense, as you're not just using your electric powers to defeat your foes. Some enemies you'll have to stun them with a few moves, followed up by other techniques if you wish to defeat them. Just like the first game, Infamous 2 has done so well with the open world aspect, having battle mechanics that are more refined, the visuals look very clean, and the way the narrative is told is well delivered. You can find both Infamous 1 and 2 in one disc as part of the Infamous collection for cheap. Let's step in the arena and get ready for the next battle, because joining the countdown is another fan favorite, Tekken Tag Tournament 2. Unlike the first tag tournament, the game has over 59 characters to choose from, and you can play the game as either a team, or play it handicap style and go at it solo. The gameplay is just like the past tag game, in which you can switch out characters at any time, which will allow the off-screen character to recover some lost HP. The tag assaults from the first game is greatly expanded, and if timed correctly, you can pull off devastating tag assist moves that can end the fight quickly. The condition for victory is still the same, in which the round ends when one member of a team was the first to be knocked out, and some stages have walls that are breakable, sending you to another part of the stage, a concept used in Tekken 6, which was then inspired by the Dead or Alive series. The character models in the game are well created, the stages are vivid with so much activity, the CG cutscenes have such fluid animation, and the overall gameplay is more improved from the first. With extra modes to play and a great soundtrack that can be customized, Tekken Tag Tournament 2 is one of the best fighters to have on the PlayStation 3. But wait, that's not the only team-based game that's in the countdown. That's right, it's not just Tekken Tag 2 that's in this countdown. Joining this list is another team fighting game from a series that has sadly fallen from grace. Ultimate Marvel vs. Capcom 3, and I'd much rather play this game than Marvel vs. Capcom Infinite. Why? Because back in 2018, I did a retrospective review video of the Marvel vs. Capcom series as a whole, with me praising many of the games, and me talking trash about Marvel vs. Capcom Infinite. If you haven't checked out the video, it's in my main Musashi X Chronicles review show. Rather than using the button layout from Marvel vs. Capcom 2, Marvel vs. Capcom 3 instead uses a more simplified button input system that was from Tatsunoko vs. Capcom. As of Ultimate Marvel vs. Capcom 3, you have a roster of 48 characters, with many of them being newcomers to the MVC banner, and like MVC 2, you fight on 3-on-3 battles. All of the mechanics that were in MVC2 are present in this game, with a few new additions being the Team Aerial combo and the X Factor, which is used to power up your team for a set amount of time, and its longevity depends on the number of team members left. I really like the design of the game, which has an emphasis on the comic book motif, from the visuals to the text designs, and the page-turning transition like reading a digital version of a comic book, and they did well on using cel-shaded art style for the character models. I don't think I need to explain the game any further than I have to, so if you haven't played the game yet, you can get Ultimate MVC3 for cheap, and have some friends with you for some good matches. The Band of Thieves have come out of retirement in their biggest heist yet, Sly Cooper Thieves in Time. Only instead of Sucker Punch, the studio outsourced their assets to another studio to create the game, and it came out wonderfully. Just like the past 3 games, Sly Cooper will still have elements of stealth as you sneak past enemies in various ways to achieve your objectives. Aside from Sly, Bentley, Murray, and Carmelita, all the characters that are playable would be Sly's ancestors, each of them having unique abilities that define their fighting style. The game is at an open world setting, much like Sly 2 and 3 were, only now, given that it's on PS3 and PS Vita, the worlds you explore are greatly expanded in comparison, and because of that, you'll do more than just completing your objectives and pickpocketing enemies. Aside from the returning clue bottles from Sly 1 and 2, as well as pickpocketing enemies for some valuables, you'll also collect some other treasures in the field that you can bring back to the hideout for more currency so that you can purchase more techniques for the team. Instead of the cel-shaded look, the developers went with a different art style in which the character models have a smoother look to them, and with the use of a cartoon-like art style, every model that moves have more fluid animation in comparison to the original games, and the cutscenes have more animation to them like an actual TV show, while the original trilogy's cutscenes have limited animation. When it comes to Sony's 3 mascot platforming teams, they're all about exploration, action, and storytelling. All the games in their respective series do very well in those aspects, but each team excelled on one of the 3 characteristics better than the other. Jak and Daxter does a great job on exploration, Ratchet and Clank does better on action, while the Cooper Gang has the edge on narrative. As far as the narrative of Sly 4 is concerned, despite some inconsistencies, especially if you keep up with the Cooper Gang mythos, Sly 4 is one of few games I know in which time travel as a plot device is managed well, which is more than I can say for Sonic the Hedgehog 2006. And don't worry folks, that game is not at all in this countdown. I just hope that there will be more Sly Cooper games in the future, but for now, if you haven't played this game yet, be sure to play the first 3 games via the Sly Collection, and then play the 4th game to get a better idea of what you're getting into, as the series is fun to play and the stories are well told. You heard me mention this series before in some of my review videos. I really love Hyperdimension Neptunia, Idea Factory's marquee game series, and of the Neptunia games on the PS3 console, the one that's getting the spotlight is the 3rd installment, Hyperdimension Neptunia Victory. I definitely am an unapologetic fan of this series when I first saw previews of the first game as well as the art style of the characters, and the premise of what the series is going for by having protagonists as visual representations of video game consoles and companies. However, I will admit some things about the series that are turnoffs. For one thing, the first Neptunia game on the PlayStation 3 has this awkward battle system that can be customized, but sadly it's the only way for characters to execute some actions, whether it be using an item, transform into their goddess forms, or tag in another character, just to name a few, and I'll admit the mechanics turned me off so much, but I do praise the game for its art style and the story being very meta with gaming references. The second game, Hyperdimension Neptunia Mark II, or as I call it, HDN2, improved the battle system slightly better, with the only turnoff is that aside from gathering action points like the first game, skill points are also being used in conjunction in order to execute some of the aforementioned actions. But at least it won't result in cheap deaths anymore like in the first game. However, in HDN Victory, the battle system from HDN2 has been streamlined and has rid of the need of action points in favor of an improved custom combo system, the CPUs only need just SP to transform into their goddess forms, and the game now has an EXE drive gauge, in which when it fills up to a certain level, characters can execute either stronger end combos, or unleash a character's signature move, or if you took the time to raise their friendship grade, called Lily Rank, you can perform powerful team-up attacks. As for the first two games, the game still delivers on the meta humor with more video game references, and some characters will also break the fourth wall to players, similar to that of Deadpool. The overall graphics may not be state-of-the-art for 7th generation console standards, but I still think it's great as they're very colorful. The series has a wonderful cast of characters that would later be getting more attention, funny enemies that would also be referencing other games, and the battle system is way better than in the past. It's also worth noting that the game also involves time travel, which is actually handled decently, and it's because of this installment of Neptunia that I became an even bigger fan than I already am, as I love collecting so many of their art books and statues whenever available, because their designs are just so lovely. If you plan on getting into the Neptunia series, your best bet is starting off with Neptunia Victory first, and if you want to learn the story of the first two games, just watch somebody else's playthrough instead. It might also be a good idea to invest on Victory's DLC for some extra help, because chances are, you're gonna need it. I know I'll get some backlash for having this game high on the list, but this remake of a great NES game is just so much fun to play. It's DuckTales Remastered at number 4. If you played the first two games on NES, the guys of WayForward, the team behind the Shantae series, did a great job of having the game as responsive as the original games were. The game is more of a retelling of the first game, but has the smooth controls of the second game, and other than the familiar stages of the first game, it also has two new original stages, with one of them being Scrooge's Money Bin, which serves as a tutorial level for first-time players, and has Scrooge McDuck rescuing his triplet nephews and stopping the Beagle Boys, which will eventually lead to the very expedition he undertakes in the first game. All the familiar locations from the first game are present. The game is presented in 2.5D style by having 2D character sprites blended with levels that are made in 3D, and the gameplay is similar to that of Castlevania II Simon's Quest in that you don't have a time limit, and you're required to find a certain number of key items in a stage in order to progress with the level. As with past games, Scrooge can also collect various items such as an ice cream cone or ice cream cake to restore some HP, or diamonds to increase his overall fortune and unlock some art pieces, and some of the characters in the show will provide some assistance or hints as they have been in the NES games. Some stages have mid-boss battles, and the regular boss battles that were very pathetic in the NES games all have new patterns, so you just can't go all crazy with Scrooge's cane so easily anymore. The 3D stage designs are well made and fully detailed, and the 2D character designs are drawn beautifully to capture the feel of the actual TV show, and their animations are done with such fluid movement, which is visually impressive. As far as sound is concerned, you can toggle the soundtrack between the familiar 8-bit soundtrack or play the arranged soundtrack, which sound just as good, and the voice acting is very top-notch, as some characters still had their past voice actors such as the late Alan Young and June Foray reprising their roles as Scrooge McDuck and Magic and the Spell respectively, and were able to provide their roles one more time before their passing, while new voice actors for other characters like Gyro Gearloose and Flintheart Glumgold sound just as good as their originals. With the presentation so wonderful, DuckTales Remastered is definitely worth picking up and play. From what I read in some news sources, the game was initially delisted from game services in August this past year, but got relisted back in March of this year, so the game is available again for download, but you can also find a physical copy of the game for cheap online as well.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
In 2009, it was a good thing I held on to my PlayStation 3 despite having a small library at the time, and it was during that year that I was able to buy and play the heck out of the original Street Fighter IV. However, over the years, Street Fighter IV would see some new revisions, so to make it easier for myself, I'm throwing in the entire Street Fighter IV series in this countdown. After the series had been in hiatus right after Street Fighter III Third Strike, Street Fighter IV would hit the arcades in 2008 and then consoles the following year. When I played the arcade version of it from a defunct arcade place back in 2008, the overall gameplay is more or less Capcom going back to basics by taking the existing engine of Street Fighter II and give it some enhancements. Aside from super moves, you can perform a focus attack in which a fighter can perform a counter attack while also absorbing enemy attacks. And the game also introduces the Ultra moves, which can only be executed if its own gauge is filled upon taking damage from your opponent, and when executed, their strength depends on how much the gauge is filled up. As of Ultra Street Fighter IV, the game has over 44 characters to choose from, each bringing different techniques in the fight, and you can select which Ultra move you want to perform. There's not much else I can say other than the character models are well designed, the stages have some good effects to them, a great soundtrack, and the gameplay flow is very amazing. So if you want the complete experience, definitely go for the Ultra version of Street Fighter 4. It's still a fun fighting game to play even now. When I first played Warriors Orochi 1 and 2, I was definitely hooked. Having both Dynasty and Samurai Warriors crossover in a mystical realm to battle the Serpent King Orochi is a neat concept. But when Warriors Orochi 3 and its ultimate expansion hit the PS3 and 360, I just couldn't put the controller down. The plot of Warriors Orochi 3 involves one of Orochi's reincarnations, the Hydra, decimating all but 3 characters, but they can be saved thanks to the Mystic Princess Kaguya, as the plot device of the game is time travel. Yeah, that's 3 games in this countdown in which time traveling is involved, the first 2 being Sly Cooper Thieves in Time and Hyperdimension Neptunia Victory. As with other Warriors games, you're tasked with taking out the enemy commander in each stage, but with the element of time travel, you can play stages that took place before some battles, and by completing them, you can replay some battles that are later altered in order to save and recruit characters from their grim fates. As of the Ultimate expansion, the game has over 145 characters, with characters from Dynasty Warriors, Samurai Warriors, characters exclusive to the world of Warriors Orochi, and characters from other games that would make playable appearances, such as Ryu Hayabusa, Ayane, and Kasumi of Ninja Gaiden and Dead or Alive fame, Sturkenberg Kronak of the Atelier RPG series, and even Sophidia Alexandra from Bandai Namco's Soul Fighting game series, just to name a few. Because of the Ultimate expansion, the story would expand further than what was initially being told, as there's more to the story than just the sudden appearance of the Hydra. The overall gameplay used in the game are from Dynasty Warriors 7 and Samurai Warriors 3, with some tweaks and certain features removed, as it won't have enough disk space. Dynasty Warriors characters will play according to how they function in DW7, as do Samurai Warriors with their own engine. As for characters that don't represent either one, they'll function as such. Characters of Japanese origin such as Kaguya or Ryu Hayabusa will have their moveset and gameplay flow based off Samurai Warriors, while characters that are not of Japanese origin such as Sophidia will play under the Dynasty Warriors 7 engine. Due to the increase in character roster, there will be some stages in Dynasty and Samurai Warriors that would fuse together with some set pieces from other games like in Ninja Gaiden or Soul Calibur. With everything I've mentioned, you can be sure that the game will keep you up for hours in order to unlock everything this game has to offer. The replay value is extremely high that, in my opinion, this game is definitely worth having in your library. So what PS3 game will take the top spot in this countdown? Yeah, you saw this one coming, and I'm very positive that so many people would be mad at me if this game wasn't considered number 1, and this epic game surely deserves the top spot. Metal Gear Solid 4, Guns of the Patriots. I'm not going to spoil the story in case nobody played the game yet, but I can say right now that the story is told beautifully, helping tie up all the loose ends from past games, and also provide some twists and turns that I can accept, even more so than Kingdom Hearts 3. Going off topic a little bit, having that Kingdom Hearts 3 backlash count is reserved only in my main review show whenever needed. Anyway, Metal Gear Solid 4. You can tell that the developers have sunk in so much production values into making the game, from the visuals, the character models, the choreography, the amount of cinematics, which is what the series is known for, and the overall gameplay. As always, you'll have to start with limited supplies and have to rely on stealth and close quarters combat to proceed with the story until you eventually reach a point in the game where you can procure more items and weapons to use. The use of camouflage in MGS3 worked out so well that a similar element is used in the form of Snake's Octocamo suit, which can imitate the texture of any material the suit touches, thereby helping him blend with the environment to avoid getting noticed, and he also has a special eye patch called the Solid Eye, which has 3 different functions that can help Snake along the way. To make the game even more intense, the developers would implement realism into the game. In this case, situations such as extreme weather conditions or being spotted by the enemy would cause Snake's stress levels to rise up, affecting his performance, which might leave him open to an attack that not even rations would help him much. This is another game that's very hard to put down once you start playing the game. I'm not kidding. The various ways to proceed with the story, the streamlined weapon system, and such screenplay of the highest level, it's no wonder why the game receives so many awards, because the game is overall brilliant. If you haven't got a chance to play this game, you can find a copy cheap online. With everything I mentioned about this game, we can all agree that not only Metal Gear Solid 4 is the #1 PlayStation 3 game, but I'll go as far to say that it's also one of the greatest video games of all time.
And there you have it, folks. My personal top 20 PlayStation 3 games. Do you like what you see in this countdown? What games in the console do you consider your favorites? Feel free to leave comments down below. Now we're going to take a little bit of a break from consoles for now, because up next on top of the game chain, we're going to take a look at the PlayStation Portable, as well as my personal favorite games for the console. Anyway, I would like to thank you viewers for taking the time to watch this video, and if by any chance you find this video and other contents of my channel interesting, feel free to subscribe to my channel at any time if you haven't done so yet, as well as follow me on social media. Until then, this has been Musashi X, and I bid you all farewell, take care, and stay tuned.